Recognizing myself now for 5 minutes for questions. Dr. Rasch, I understand that most of the federal research on the topic of geoengineering has been conducted at our federal labs. Can you elaborate on how much funding is currently slated for this type of research?
To my knowledge, the current funding is restricted essentially to a few university professors through the National Science Foundation. The rest of it is being occasionally supported from various agencies to stay engaged in activities like the research reports, which you've heard about, but most of the other work that's being done is being done through supportive philanthropic organizations or for free on weekends and evenings by scientists who are interested in these things. It probably is bounded by less than $1 million a year. It could be a few $100,000 a year of supported research directly for geoengineering. That's to my knowledge. I don't really know what it is.
Any other panelists want to weigh in on that question? Dr. MacMartin?
The National Center for Atmospheric Research has been providing computer time, which is supported by the NSF, but that's basically, Phil's answer is correct.
And so I would guess that, and I don't want to presume anything, but it sounds like you would agree that the topic has not been adequately pursued in the research phase.
Right. My reaction is that it's very easy to identify the fact that a very small amount of effort has been put into this area, and that progress could be made much more rapidly with a relatively small amount of funding.
It leads me to ask, why has geoengineering not received the same kind of funding as maybe some other types of research over the last 8 to 10 years? Dr. Rasch?
Well, I think there's a recognition by all that it's quite a controversial subject of real concern to citizens of the U.S. and to other scientists as well, and there's some reluctance to take the first step, is my sense. That's my best answer.
Well, Dr. Majkut, or actually anyone in the panel, outside of the federal government and you've mentioned some of the philanthropic supporters of geoengineering research, what's the post-secondary education or university level of research in this area? Ms. Wanser?
I'm already on, sorry.
Yeah.
So the overall philanthropic funding in this area is, I would characterize it as maybe in the range of $1 to $2 million a year, mostly allocated towards one program, the Stratospheric Aerosol program at Harvard. For the most part, my experience in the philanthropic community is that this subject matter is not yet acceptable for funding. So traditional sources of environmental and climate research funding in the philanthropic community are not yet funding in this area.
And Dr. Majkut, how about universities?
Well, we know there's a few research programs around the country, Harvard, University of Washington, other individual scholars. Whether or not this particular item falls under a research priority for a particular university, I don't think is a question that's easy for me to answer. There are individual academics who put their energy into it, as Phil says, but it's not a very large field. As you go to these scientific meetings where geoengineering is discussed, you see that there's a relatively small number of people working on these issues.
Are other countries working on geoengineering research? Dr. MacMartin?
So I think the largest program in the world is probably the one at Beijing Normal University in China, but that's relatively new and unclear exactly where they're going with that. But in Europe, there's some small efforts as well, but not substantially larger than what's in the U.S.
So if thinking of it in terms of global competition, it doesn't sound like we're falling behind global competitors. It's just that we're not advancing as rapidly as perhaps many or some would like. Is that fair to say?
Not yet, but that may change depending on China's future
Depending on what
investments.
Beijing normally does, yes. Dr. Rasch?
Well, it was just, I might beg to differ a little bit with Doug, that my sense is that over the last 5 years or so, a variety of European countries have identified explicitly some funding for geoengineering research that amounts to a few $1,000,000 a year, perhaps, for at that level, which is substantially larger than the amounts that I could identify in the United States.
Well, again, thank you, all of you, for being here. And my time has expired, and I recognize the